Klee was born the 18th of December, 1879, near Bern, Switzerland, the son of Hans Klee, a teacher of music, German by birth and nationality. Paul's mother, like her husband, had been trained as a musician. As a boy, Klee learned to play the violin to near professional standard. Later, after his marriage in 1906 to the pianist Lily Stumpf, musical evenings were a regular part of his family life. In establishing the freedom of the visual arts to act independently of representation, the analogy with music was very important, and Klee was well qualified to understand both the use of his analogy and its limitations. As well as his training in music, Klee received a thorough academic education and graduated from the Literaschule in Bern in 1898. He went to Munich to study art, where he arrived in October 1898, and at first studied privately, then entered the academy a year later. Paul Klee was part poet and visionary, part disciplined, methodical craftsman and well-regulated bourgeois. His background and education had emphasized the latter aspect, and his development was slow, partly because it took him time to be equally aware of its opposite. By 1911, Paul Klee was not only a fully fledged painter, but an intellectually formed modern artist capable of assessing the exciting movements happening around him. Klee joined the Bauhaus in November 1920, which was the perfect theater to unfold his teaching methods, an art school devoted to reuniting the fine and applied arts and architecture in a manner suitable for an industrial age. The Bauhaus years were the years of greatest technical variety and invention of form for Klee. From 1933 until his death in 1940, a progressive simplification of his means accompanied a progressively more intense and powerful expression. The works of Paul Klee have been of enormous importance in the development of modern art. At a time of uncertainty and loss of direction in art, he was a source of confidence and admiration. Paul Klee died at Muralto Locarno on June 29, 1940. The Artists at the Window, 1909. It is the early Klee that we see here, full of self-doubt about himself and art, not yet the master of color and the inspiring teacher he later became. Here the face is in shadow, and only the hunched posture, distorted as it is, suggests introspective concentration on the sheet before him. There are outlines to the figure, but they are made of light coming from behind and are part of the form. House nearby a stone trail, 1913. In the Quarry, 1913. Red and White Domes, 1914. This painting was inspired by Klee's visit to North Africa in the spring of 1914. The outlines of the domes themselves and some small rectangles, which can be read as windows, resolve the work into a crystalline version of a North African townscape in the dying heat of the day. Klee was also responsive to the local color and the North African style of building based on the cube and the dome. On a motif from Hammamet, 1914. Klee here emphasizes the grid construction, but breaks it with a fanciful shape at the bottom, a tree or bush on a hill perhaps. Hammamet and the Mosque, 1914. Saint-Germain, nearby Tunis, 1914. Design of Hammamet, 1914. In front of the doors of Kairouan, 1914. Faune in Mark's Garden, 1915. Anatomy of Aphrodite, 1915. Quarry at Ostermundigen, 1915. The Sun Who Already Found the World, 1916. Hermitage, 1918. Hermitage directly invokes a stage by including the folds of a curtain on each side. We may be intended to see the scene as a stage set, awaiting the entrance of actor or dancer. In the middle of a conifer forest, inhabited only by birds, there is a low hill crowned by a cross, and beside it a little building with a pinnacle. There are other symbols, not readily interpreted. Klee created a quasi-logical world, having enough points of contact with the real one to provide a parallel text, so to speak, for its interpretation. Garden Landscape, 1918. Zoological Garden, 1918. Architectural Writing, 1918. From the Gray of the Night Appears Suddenly, 1918. Growth in an Old Garden, 1919. We see plants and trees depicted in what it seems like a simple shorthand way. Already, Klee was showing a detailed interest in the botanical intricacies of simple plants like the horsetail, which may be speculatively recognized here. The sun is perhaps a sunflower, or may stand for the sun as the origin of photosynthetic growth. The very idea of growth was immensely important to Klee and formed a bridge between his botanical and non-botanical work. He constantly reverted to the theme of the balance of forces between natural and man-made, and between order and disorder. Cosmetic Composition, 1919. Underlying this painting is a grid of soft-edged rectangles of color. A fanciful spatial structure is imposed on it by nervous drawing with the brush, showing frames, steps, and gangways of the kind that flowed so easily from his pen in numerous drawings of this period. In the upper center is an occluded sun half obscuring an eye with moon and stars. The title Cosmetic Composition, on the other hand, suggests that we should recognize here a heavenly body, while the presence of an analog of the sun, the eye, keeps it on appropriately symbolic level. Still Life with Thistleflower, 1919. Full Moon, 1919. Villa R, 1919. Tunisian Garden from the South, 1919. Bushes in the Wood, 1919. Defensive Walls, 1919. Architecture and Windows, 1919. Rose Garden, 1920. Three White Bellflowers, 1920. Landscape with Yellow Church Tower, 1920. Train Station, L112, 14 kilometers, 1920. Angel Serving a Light Breakfast, 1920. Nocturnal Festivity, 1921. Despite the absence of obvious clues like the folds of curtains, this is a work that speaks strongly of the theater. There are no actors, but Klee somehow creates the expectation of their imminent entry. The theatrical impression is partly due to the atmosphere of fairy tale invoked by the insubstantial buildings and their mysterious lighting. A Young Lady's Adventure, 1921. Here, line crosses and recrosses to enclose shadowy planes of color to most mysterious effect. 3 or 4 strange creatures emerge from the shadows to surround the central figure, like devils in a Temptation of St. Anthony. The maiden herself is strange with her multiple mouths and deformed ear, but she is elaborately dressed with cape and gloves, wasp waist, and hobble skirt. She seems to sway on a round base like a ninepin, as if all too likely to fall. Crystal Gradation, 1921. In this canvas, Klee shows how to manage the gradation of colors while preserving their purity. It is impossible to tell where on the page Klee started this supreme example of pictorial musical composition, but each shape or theme interrelates with the rest in a profoundly homogeneous way, and not without wonder and romantic feeling. Fugue in Red, 1921. The musical analogy inherent in all these paintings of graduated colors is here spelled out in the title. The comparison with a fugue in music is apt because here the superimposed forms retain their shape, as does the theme tune in a fugue. Some of the forms employed have a more organic nature and stray into another of Klee's intimate concerns, the business of portraying growth in art in parallel to nature. As growth is also inherent in the idea of fugue, Klee here establishes the connection between music, nature, and art in a way that must have been very satisfactory to him. City of Dreams, 1921. Landscape near E, Bavaria, 1921. Dry and Fresh Garden, 1921. Picture of a Red and Green City, 1921. Aphrodite's Vases, or Ceramic Erotic Religious. Hoffman's Tales, 1921. Red Balloon, 1922. Except the sun balloon itself and the dome, everything is achieved by straight lines. The relative informality is due to many features: the delicacy and hesitancy of the lines, the reticent receding colors, as well as the images it is so easy to read into the painting. The straight lines also play an amusing counterpoint with the wavy weave of the muslin on which they are painted. Senecio, 1922. Klee has put the circle to a somewhat different application here, to denote the form of a flower, which is certain from his choice of title for this painting, Senecio being the botanical name for a genus of plants. The yellow color as of ragwort, the eyes as radiating petals, support the identification of the title. Klee was drawing a parallel between the flower as the crowning glory of the plant and the human face as the flower of the body. This canvas is among the most superficially childlike of Klee's paintings, but on long contemplation, its tones shift and merge until it becomes an icon of almost hypnotic power. Twittering Machine, 1922. Here, a sheet prepared with an old-looking priming of pinkish-gray watercolor, which received an ink line with a rough edge like an etching. Against this worn surface is performed an absurd concert, forcefully suggesting a crazy automaton of wire with a crank on which 4 bird-like creatures are mounted. The rise and fall of these piercing creatures is connected, in no very logical way, with the movement of the crank. We see their heads and tongues at various stages of voice production. Here, the thin, wavy line and taut structure are perfectly matched to the shrill noise we can expect to hear. Also, the structure is almost disembodied and floats high above any contact with the ground, indicating that such a high-pitched clamor seems to have little natural reason. Stage Decoration, Landscape, 1922. The Twitter Machine, 1922. Diverse Perversity Analyze, 1922. The God of the Septentrional Wood, 1922. Screwed Place, 1922. Evening Separation, 1922. Analysis of Diverse Perversities, 1922. Castles in the Air, 1922. The Tightrope Walker, 1923. Klee uses his skill as a draftsman to conjure up a world of absurd structures whose frailty mocks their carefully fabricated appearance. It seems to be an ironic comment on the replacement of human by mechanized organs. The little stuntman caught in the crossed spotlight beams symbolizes and presides over a structure which is intended to represent this balance of forces in a more diagrammatic way. The picture field is intersected by the rising light beam, giving an off-center axis as the stuntman on his wire. Puppet Theater, 1923. Small booths on each side suggest the arrival of a Punch or Judy. A charming marionette with stiff arms occupies the center stage. The line of the stage is clearly shown and seems to correspond to a join in the paper. It is evident that the vertical black bar, which bisects the colorful globe shape at the bottom, has been superimposed over the original colors. Obviously, the painting has been extensively modified during execution, and it appears, in fact, that the bottom strip was cut from another painting and pasted on. This would have been the occasion for Klee to unify the two parts with the overall black background that throws the colors into such prominent relief. Cantatrice L. in the part of Fiordaligi, 1923. Battle Scene of the Comic Opera, Fantastic, 1923. Architecture, 1923. Plastic Architecture, Red, Yellow, and Blue, 1923. Ventriloquist Shouter in the Swamp, 1923. Cosmic Floor, 1923. Double Tent, 1923. Eros, 1923. Landscape with Yellow Birds, 1923. Landscape at Sunset, 1923. 17 IRR, 1923. Ventriloquist and Shouter in the Desert, 1923. Carnival in the Mountains, 1924. Line is not used here for structural clarity, but to create by cross-hatching a smoky, obscure space peopled by sinister beings. The hatching and modeling define the background and not the objects on it, underlining their non-substantive nature. The blind girl and child, the monster holding an eye, are like a Gothic equivalent of Picasso's more famous Minotaur etchings in the 30s. We see the mountains and a village, a woman in modern dress, and a child wearing a mask. Nothing fearful is going on, but the effect is sinister, thanks mainly to the monstrous creature to the right of center. The monster has a head and limbs. One leg ends in a high-heeled shoe, but there is a suggestion of struts and pulleys that is reminiscent of Duchamp or Picabia. Botanical Theater, 1924-34. There is an indication of folded curtain at each side, but the painting is theatrical in a general sense only, in that it presents a shallow box with a floor, backcloth, and wings. The mise-en-scène is very elaborate, and many of the forms belong to the cactus family and are primitive organisms with a powerful will to survive and flourish. A little creature is pacing solemnly to the right along the floor, and possibly an owl is to the left of him. The large cacti on the right can be read as humans with uplifting arms. The strange red form that hangs there is the heart of the whole pictorial organism and has a tangible substance. Actor's Mask, 1924. Fish Magic, 1925. Curiously, Klee has pasted a separate piece of canvas to the left of center. The resemblance between a fish tank and a stage did not escape Klee, who has fostered it by hint of a curtain at the top left corner and by the odd little figures who look out from inside the proscenium opening. This is no ordinary aquarium, nor stage, inhabited as it is by fish, plants, and celestial bodies all together. Their timeless world is observed by two representatives of the human race, and is invaded by time in the shape of two hourglasses and a steeple clock lowered into the scene in a net or fish trap. The little person with two faces who looks solemn on the left within the human time scale, joyous on the right within the time scale of the natural world. Mystic Ceramic, 1925. Old Sonority, abstract on black background, 1925. Mask with a Little Flag, 1925. Reconstruction, 1926. Here the whole picture field or ground is the unifying factor, carefully worked and delicately tinted as it is. The objects placed on it are in fact well composed, presided over and held together by the misty sun. They all have an architectural character, and, aided by the title, it is easy to read the painting as a building site, where dust of construction mingles with the heat of the day to throw a yellowish pall over the view. The presiding sun identifies its subjects in cosmic terms and makes us aware of time, season, and atmosphere, while here it denotes oppressive heat. Gate in the Garden, 1926. In this oil panel, Klee successfully transposes his parallel line technique from drawing to painting, enabling him to add the mysterious spatial effects of color to those of line. The motif of the entrance hangs in space like a portent, while its red color conveys a warning to the heedless who might stray through it. This is one of the earliest premonitions of Klee's awareness of mortality that is such a moving feature of his late works. The garden has special significance. It is not only the scene of mankind's creation and fall, but as the place of civilization fenced in against barbarism. To leave it was to encounter danger and fear of the unknown, yet every dweller in the garden had ultimately to pass through the gate. Castle to be built in the forest, 1926. Parallel lines can suggest many things, among them the trunks of trees in the forest, or the columns, the courses of brick or stone, the timbers and planks of buildings, its ambiguity explored by Klee in this painting. Which is the castle? Which is the forest? Do we see piles of timbers? Is the rectangular motif in the center an opening into a long perspective, or is it, on the contrary, the plan of the projected castle? Around the Fish, 1926. This great fish picture is rather stark and diagrammatic, but the central motif of the carp in a blue dish is memorably painted. Although dead, very dead, rather than cooked, this does seem to denote fish offered as food, suggesting that the picture represents a cycle of nature, a sort of food chain. Both the title and the circular arrangements of the symbols around the fish might support this idea. The most puzzling feature of this work is the tiny schematic human head growing on a stem in a vase like a cut flower. This head receives an emphatic message from the fish, indicated by an arrow and an exclamation mark. Destroyed Olympus, 1926. Destroyed Olympus, Details, 1926. Florentine's Villas, 1926. Pastoral, 1927. There is direct parallel with the form of a musical score here. Parallel horizontal lines support a whole variety of marks and signs, suggestive of both letters and musical notes, but inflected to make them capable of various interpretations. Pastoral has a very built-up texture into which the lace-like lines are indented, so that the whole work takes on a tactile and mysterious quality, like an ancient tablet with some runic message on it. Threatening Snowstorm, 1927. All the lines are straight and approximately vertical or horizontal, diverging just enough to give the resulting structure a pleasing irregularity, like a street of ancient buildings. Klee's title invites us to read it as a town, and he inserts a small visual clue to help make the connection: the pitched roof of the tallest building on the left. A heavy winter sky is realized using a spray technique, creating its doom-laden surrounding atmosphere. The Black Prince, 1927. In The Black Prince, 2 circles for the eyes, an angled bar for the nose, and 2 straight ones for the lips are the naive means employed for a primitive subject, a picture book Moorish chieftain, oddly enough with blue eyes. The star, crown, and richly patterned clothing bear script-like markings as signs of the exotic. Garden with Stream, 1927. Aquarium, 1927. Elected Place, 1927. Acrobat's Portrait, 1927. Page extracted from the City Book, 1928. Clouds over Bore, 1928. Italian City, 1928. Cat and Bird, 1928. Little Jester in a Tree, 1929. This picture depends for its beauty on the intersecting of curved lines which enclose one or more figures, like the intersecting instrumental lines in music. This canvas began with a monotype of 2 years earlier, drawn with a single line. Later, Klee tidied up the intersections of the line and added an eyeball and the colored hatching within the areas bounded by the crisscrossing lines. These adaptations created a memorable image, with pseudo-cubist modeling and shallow penetration of. By tracing with a pencil, starting on the loop of the left leg and finishing at the wrist of the left hand, one may prove that the drawing could indeed have been executed without lifting the pen from the paper. Monument in Fertile Country, 1929. It can be observed that at every point where a vertical line crosses a horizontal one, the layers on each side of the vertical are halved or doubled. In that way, the thickest layer is subdivided into halves, quarters, and eighths. As a rule, the color is more intense the thinner the layer. On the left and right, we see the cultivated strips, some with crop, some fallow. In the middle, larger units of pink and sandy color denote the huge blocks of temple or colossus. Some diagonal lines suggest an element of space in what would otherwise be a map-like representation. Fire in the Evening, 1929. This may not easily be recognized as one of the Egyptian paintings, since it deals not with the crystal daylight of Upper Egypt, but with its equally beautiful, short-lived twilight. As night falls, the squat rectangle of red to right of center assumes maximum importance and draws the eye like the glow of a fire in the evening. Uncomposed in Space, 1929. Monument at the Border of the Fertile Country, 1929. Strange Vegetable, 1929. Before the Snow, 1929. Main Roads and Secondary Roads, 1929. Monument on Fertile Land, 1929. Ad Marginum, 1930. This is one of the last examples of Klee's detailed technique of drawing that defines the form, as he put it, exotopically, that is, by shading outside the form, not within it. His approach to his work was beginning to change, moving away from the urgent complexity of method and meaning to pursue more purely pictorial ends. Something of the new mood can perhaps be seen in the empty center here, a space cleared for the immense red globe that occupies it. We are perhaps looking down into a pool in which objects are reflected, or perhaps upward through the greenish waters of the Nile, which mercifully filter the relentless heat of the sun. Fruits on Red, 1930. This delightful and playful work has a subtitle, The Musician's Handkerchief, and started life as the red silk cloth that Klee placed under his chin when playing the violin. He used the handkerchief in its entirety, taking its wavy edges as the starting point for the filigree of delicate branches bearing the fruits of the title. Some of these are themselves made of circles of similar fabric, delicately pasted on. The composition is sparing and makes much use of empty space, which renders it specially attractive to the taste of our own period, with the interest in the minimal statement and its acceptance of the Zen-inspired belief that less is more. Conqueror, 1930. In this work, Klee returns to the mathematical basis as in his Bauhaus exercises, but does not resist giving it a humorous interpretation. The composition derives from a watercolor, daringly poised, which is an essay in how to convey equilibrium in terms of shape and density of color. This image is contemporaneous with this drawing and seems to suggest a certain irony toward their reproduction. What began as a diagrammatic reflection on mass, weight, and energy has become an image of fatuous bravado. Garden in Flower, 1930. Triple Time Square, 1930. Open Book, 1930. Maundering on Green Background, 1930. Pyramid, 1930. Colored Board, 1930. Polyphony White, 1930. Ghost's Oath, 1930. Three Subjects, Polyphony, 1931. Klee took up an idea of the Surrealists regarding spontaneous drawing and gave it his own specially musical interpretation. In the true polyphonic drawings, there must be more than one form, corresponding to separate themes in music which must be harmonized. Just as in music some effort is necessary to distinguish the parts orally, more than a glance is needed to separate the forms in this drawing. A large, complex motif enfolds two smaller ones. Klee has given substance to these motifs by shadowing them in color, purplish-brown for the large, pink for the two smaller. It will be observed that this shadow is always consistently on one side of the line, thus appearing endotopic in some places and exotopic in others. The Light and Else, 1931. Still Life and Dove, 1931. Castle's Garden, 1931. Uplift and Direction, Glider Flight, 1932. Klee's work always included many allusions to flight and weightlessness. He made a firm intellectual effort to construct a quasi-logical, but in fact non-rational, system to convey the sensations of overcoming gravity and reaching into what he called the silent, pure, and natural dynamism of the cosmos. Klee successfully conveys a sensation of soaring and floating. He also added graphic symbols to convey the forces of thrust and gravity to locate the action in the open skies. Polyphony, 1932. The polyphonic principle is here expressed in overlapping, straight-edged planes of color. Here, the overlapping planes are hardly distinguishable by their boundaries because neither the colors nor the areas of dots correspond with them. We therefore have a multivalent system of harmonies, which is sustained over the whole surface of a large canvas. The analogies it promotes are between nature, art, and music. On the one hand, there is the shimmering veil of colored atmosphere through which Impressionism and Pointillism taught us to view the visual scene with its many ambiguities. On the other hand, there is the visual music which combines the polyphony of Mozart with the tonal color of Debussy. Ad Paranasum, 1932. The strictly polyphonic structure is relaxed in favor of a more emphatic pictorial composition, which employs regular, well-balanced geometric forms, but subordinates them to the creation of a mysterious and imposing atmosphere with an acute sense of place. The little rectangles out of which the painting is built recall not so much the brushstroke of the pointillists, but the tessera of mosaics, or, even more, the regular horizontal courses of brickwork or masonry. Their color varies from an intense blue to a bright brick red, and the color relationship with their background constantly changes, causing the surface to hover between the materially present and the immaterially distant. Evening in the Valley, 1932. Horrible Mask, 1932. North Room, 1932. The Future Man, 1933. In this work, Klee has taken up one of his polyphonic drawings of 2 years before, consisting of 2 subjects, completed the head, and added the arms and legs to produce an image of an infant in skirts. He has filled in its profile, not distinguishing the original polyphonic subjects and the background with a technique peculiar to this period of gouache or watercolor applied in paste form with a spatula, creating an impression of relief. Phantom in Rags, 1933. Child's Bust, 1933. Struck Off the Lists, 1933. Little Room in Venice, 1933. Blossoming, 1934. This canvas is a variation on his grid and stratified works, but with less arithmetical rigor in its design, while the grid on which it is based is wavy, like a net moving in the wind. The title Blossoming again seeks to force the spectator to make that connection between an apparently abstract painting and nature. Here he uses bright colors confined to the smallest rectangles and concentrated into the center. Earthy colors predominate around the edges, inviting us to read the composition as a flowering plant growing in a well-weeded soil. Afflicted, 1934. Village in the Mountain in Autumn, 1934. Flowering, 1934. Devastated Country, 1934. Rested Sphinx, 1934. Drawn One, 1935. This earnest and round-faced personage emerges at the last moment, so to speak, from an abstract composition of circles and angle, with the simple addition of eyes and mouth. Walpurgis Night, 1935. It is in gouache applied with a flattened object in long strands like coarse hair, a fitting analogy for conjuring up these terrifying witches. Klee has let his hand have free rein in twining these strands, with results that take him again into the camp of the surrealists, since the appearance of this work suggests that both the form and the content were evolved spontaneously during execution. The Light and the Fish Bones, 1935. Female Demon, 1935. South Garden, 1936. Jewels, 1937. In 1937, Klee had been suffering for 3 years from a progressive disease, sclerodermia, resulting in deterioration of his physical strength. This is no doubt the reason why his late works are painted with a simpler brush technique and larger forms. In this painting, suddenly we now find lines that are broken, fragmentary, on the way to becoming not so much lines as shapes in themselves. These short staccato lines occasionally mark a boundary between planes, but their main purpose seems to be to create a dialogue with the colored planes, and especially with the jewels, the little shapes that spangle the surface of the whole. The Musician, 1937. Viaduct Revolution, 1937. Oriental Garden, 1937. The Child and His Aunt, 1937. Harmonized Battle, 1937. Scenic Landscape, 1937. The Nile Legend, 1937. The Nil Legend, 1937. Blue Night, 1937. Contemplating, 1938. The method of composing with broken and fragmentary lines comes into its own without the counterpoint of colored planes. Here the lines are longer, more curvaceous and involved, but they seldom touch or form into an enclosed figure. The effect is to set the whole surface alive with possibilities, as our eye seeks to relate these graphic marks to one another, or to complete in the imagination the relationship that Klee has already suggested. The face looking out at us from the left center may have prompted Klee's title, but there are at least 6 other eyes visible and other configurations that may denote faces. None of these images is located in space, unless it is the square walking on short legs along the bottom edge of the composition. Heroic Roses, 1938. The origin of the disjunctive, almost dismembered pieces of line may be found in his drawings of plants and insects. 2 forms often used in the late years are among the basic building blocks of growth: the fork or branch and the spiral. Only he could couple the concepts of rose and heroism, but the energy generated by the bold spirals, forkings, and zigzags justifies the paradox. Red Waistcoat, 1938. The use of fragments of discontinuous line may have been derived from Cubism. The way he used these lines is of course utterly different, but it shares with Cubism the capacity to hint at forms rather than spell them out, and to suggest relationships not just around the central features of the composition, but over the whole surface. Klee adds something more, an energy which derives from his supreme management of interval. Wherever lines come close to one another but do not touch, energy is created, as half-open doors create draft, or chinks focus light. The animation that comes from this source permits an astonishing number of ambiguous forms to exist independently within the picture, each signaling its existence, but all in perfect harmony. Park near Lou, for Lucerne, 1938. At no time did Klee ever set out to represent the surface attraction of parks and gardens. As we have seen, his approach was far more analytical. Yet here, using only the most basic symbols of growth, he sings an unsurpassed hymn of praise to the beauty of nature. The picture has the characteristics of the late style without its asperities and without the rather disturbing appearance of half-concealed sign language. The absence of readable signs, only the central tree motif is of this kind, makes it easier to appreciate the principle of composition by interval. In Park Near Loo, there is a new relationship between the black linear elements and the background, with each element surrounded by its own broad penumbra of color. Heroical Bowstroke, 1938. Insula Dulcamara, 1938. Pomona Too Ripe and Slightly Bent, 1938. Earth's Witch, 1938. Three Young Exotics, 1938. Puerto Rico, 1938. Intention, 1938. Aeolian, 1938. Outburst of Fear, 1939. Each form is enclosed, distinct, and does not touch its neighbor, but one of them at least is also convoluted and organic in a somewhat repellent way. By introducing a hand and a terror-stricken face, Klee has chosen to turn the whole ensemble into an image of human dismemberment. But his title invites us to consider this not in the physical sense, but an analogy of mental and psychological breakup under extreme stress. Mephisto as Pallas, 1939. It was the form twisting and flowing under Klee's frail hand that prompted the thoughts behind the title here. The crumpled face and Mephistophelian grin surmounted by the plumed helmet of Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom. Deep in the Woods, 1939. Consisting of nothing more than some leaves and a flower or fruit, all of which glow in a green lighter than that of the forest depths, the picture is yet an image of nature itself. It evinces longing for nature, a highly romantic and very German picture. It is nevertheless completely unsentimental. Bastard, 1939. Angel Still Feminine, 1939. Poor Angel, 1939. Severe Appearance, 1939. Starving Young Girl, 1939. Enlacement, 1939. Love Song Under the New Moon, 1939. Idle Park, 1939. The Layer of the Four, 1939. Woman in Peasant Dress, 1940. Here, a work of the last 6 months of his life, the black lines are not fragmentary. On the contrary, they form thick, continuous walls, within which the colors enclosed shine like colored glass. It has taken marks of the brush to adapt an abstract composition to human likeness. The shapes of the headdress, which prompted the title, were probably part of the evolving structure, and the orientation of the canvas may not have been settled until the eyes and mouth were added. There is no tragedy, no shadow even, in the title Klee has given it, but the startling appearance of the chalk-white face in the context of Klee's last months must come as a reminder of mortality. Kettle Drummer, 1940. In this very late work, Klee's linear shorthand is pared down to its most expressive minimum. The drummer's arms have themselves become drumsticks, of which one is raised vertically in a gesture of chilling finality. The head, defined by a single loop of the gross black line, contains one feature only, an unwinking eye. This head sees all, but communicates nothing, except the unremitting beat of the drum. The eye still transfixes each spectator, but it was surely Klee himself who was the first object of its baleful stare, and who felt the beat and roll of the drum as a symbol of his own approaching death. Klee seldom used color in such a minimal way as here, with hasty patches of red to hammer home the painful directness of the message. Death and Fire, 1940. This moving work can be considered as Klee's last self-portrait. Its technique and form are consistent with the development of the late style as we have seen it, the preparation of the canvas and the application of the paint reduced to a minimum. Even this minimum, it seems, is fading, the pigments barely brushed onto the coarse grain of the canvas and the thick black line. Whether or not this was actually the result of physical weakness, it conveys a touching impression of bodily fading and withdrawal from life. The title speaks of a deeper involvement with the last things, and the composition was surely intended from the beginning to present the image it does. The figure on the right, so alarming and imposing in its simplicity, was always a figure. The death head, always a head. Prisoner, 1940. Glass Facade, 1940. Flora and Rocks, 1940. Without Title, 1940.